late, and we are sorry about having to throw it together at the last minute. I am here in Stephanie Klick'S district in one of the public libraries that is in the region that is represented by a certain person in the Texas state legislature named Stephanie Klick. She is someone who came from nursing. She has an education in Christian schools, but she's a nurse by profession, and she has represented this district. It's a very conservative district in Texas since 2012, if I understand correctly. Now, she is the chair of a committee in the Texas House of Representatives called the Public Health Affairs Committee, and there are several important bills that right now are under her direction. The most important one is one of several bills that are collectively called the Save James bills, which we're going to hear about from Jeff Younger here. The reason why we're calling this together is because we have heard all of this alarm online in the conservative world about Republican legislators and Republican leaders not standing up for important principles. We saw that Governor Noem in South Dakota sank a bill that would have stopped transgender sports, and Governor Asa Hutchinson in Arkansas tried to stop a bill similar to the one that we're trying to pass here in Texas. And there's other areas as well that are covered by this pro-family area of concern. Texas is generally viewed as this deep red state, but there are a lot of games that can be played, and that's what we're trying to prevent. We only have 6 months every 2 years to pass bills. There's 2 houses, so any bill has to get through committee and then to the floor for a vote in one house, and then gets referred to the other chamber, and then very often has to go through committee in the other chamber, and then has to be brought to the floor for a vote. At every step along the way, people who are the chairs of committees can do all kinds of things if they are under pressure to sink the bills, okay? And so Jeff Younger will talk a little bit about that now. Tell us about the Save James bills and what is at stake, and particularly what people who live in Stephanie Klick's district can do about it.
Well, let me tell you what led up to these bills. Without my consent, my ex-wife transitioned my son to a girl before his 3rd birthday. She taught him that, she taught him this horrible lie that he had a female brain in a male body, and made him uncomfortable in himself, and began to really pressure him and punish him if he didn't act like a girl. She enrolled him in school as a girl without my consent. She changed his name to a girl's name without my consent. And the medical records from our court activities and our court verdict show that she planned to put my son on puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones at 8 years old. Well, he's now 8 years old. And I've been fighting to get legislation to stop this since he was 3. The chemical castration drugs that they planned to put him on at 8 would have permanently sterilized him and would have damaged his skeleton, so that he's an avid boxer and football player, and he would never be able to play those sports again for the rest of his life. Further, one of the unique aspects of the Save James case is that my son only presents as a girl with his mom. With me and everyone else, he presents as a boy. So he doesn't present consistently at all. He doesn't present insistently, and he's not consistent. So he doesn't meet the 3 criteria needed to get a diagnosis for gender dysphoria. So this boy has 2 choices. This boy could be raised by his mom into a lifetime and long-term prospects that have a suicide rate over 20 times the national average, or he could be raised normally as a boy and just have a normal outcome. Unfortunately, the institutions in this state, the psychologists, the schools, CPS. I've endured 7 CPS investigations. The government agencies in the Texas Attorney General's office, they don't know what to do with these cases. The courts have just allowed my ex-wife to transition my son even after I have a verdict. So I have two rulings by courts that my son is a male by sex, a boy by gender, and his name is James. And yet the schools are today, right now, teaching my son that he's a girl. How did this happen? Well, I guess the big thing is that if you just leave children alone and you just watch and be cautious with them and raise them and socialize them normally as boys, 80 to 95%, depending on what studies you consult, will just resolve by the time puberty's finished. And these boys come to identify with their biological sex. And it's really no different than tomboys that we used to call girls like this tomboys. And by the time they got through puberty, they're usually some of the most beautiful women and the most eligible women for marriage. These things just resolve if we leave them alone. That's exactly why the psychologists block puberty. They block the cure for gender dysphoria because puberty is the cure. So I've been struggling with this. I've been ordered by the court to not teach my son traditional teachings on sexuality and gender in my Christian religion. I'm under a gag order right now, which prohibits me from talking about any LGBT issue, whether my son's a boy or a girl, anything like that. And it's very clear that in Texas, we need legislative guidance. The courts need legislative guidance. The schools and the agencies all need legislative guidance. And I just want to give you some outrageous examples that led legislators in this state to even propose these bills. So again, despite the fact that I have 2 court rulings that my son's a boy, the public school in Capel continues to teach my son that he's a girl to this level. When I bring my son to school as a boy, the teacher gives him a dress to wear. They do it to that level. And I can't get them to stop. I've been through the grievance process. The only thing I'm left with now is doing a lawsuit against a government agency, which is, a forlorn hope. They just won't stop doing it. The Texas family courts have no idea what to do either. In my case, they're just letting my ex-wife relitigate this every single year. I have to go to court and prove that my son's a boy every single year. I've spent over $1 million on this. And there are a lot of fathers who just can't do that kind of thing, and they're going to lose their kids to this movement. Parents are being illegally gagged by courts. Courts don't want to deal with this issue, so they're just telling parents that you're going to be held in contempt of court if you talk about whether your son's a boy or if you talk about LGBT issues. That's illegal. Those are unconstitutional orders, and we need to stop that too. The other thing is that the child support issue, which nobody ever talks about. So right now, under current Texas statutes, I am required to pay for psychological therapy where they teach my son as a girl. And it's going to be a cold day in hell before I do that. I am not going to take any actions that harm my son, and that would harm my son. But right now in the state of Texas, that's considered medical child support. And if I don't pay that, they'll put me in jail for that. So there's a whole number of issues, I haven't even covered them all, that this has created in Texas. The courts, the schools, the agencies need these laws. So 2 laws were proposed, one by Stephen Toth, which was a very simple bill. It simply classifies these chemical castration and the surgical mutilation of children and transgender surgeries. It just classifies those as child abuse. While it still leaves open medical interventions for children who may have precocious puberty, children who have special intersex problems, or medical deformities that they need plastic surgery to help with. It has all of those good exemptions, but it says that if you're trying to change a child's identity away from their biological sex, if that's the aim of your medical interventions, that's child abuse. Then we have Matt Krause's bill, HB 1399, which simply outlaws the procedures. It doesn't reference child abuse at all. It simply outlaws the procedures for the purpose of changing gender and removes liability protection from doctors, allowing them to be sued for those procedures. And that would effectively prevent them from getting medical insurance for those procedures. So both of those are good bills. I like both of them, and I actually think both of them should be passed. I think doctors should have their liability protections removed, and I think it's child abuse. The problem we've had is that, one, we have Dade Phelan as Speaker of the House, who has Human Rights Campaign, which is the largest lobbying group, the most powerful lobbying group for the LGBT agenda. They give him a 100% approval rating. He's a Republican with a 100% approval rating from the largest gay and transgender lobbying group in America. He's the Speaker of the House, and he has made very clear that he doesn't want these bills to see the light of day, and he doesn't want to vote on the House floor. The committee chairwoman, Representative Klick, has delayed bringing these bills to her committee, and in my opinion, was attempting to never give them a hearing. We have a hearing scheduled for next week on Wednesday. However, it's not clear that even after the hearing, she's going to allow them to be voted on in her committee. So we need people to contact Klick from her district and say, look, we thought you were a conservative. We thought that you would protect the children of Texas. We thought you were a nurse who cared about, ending barbaric medical practices against children. And lest you think that this is some unusual thing, that we're getting involved in medical decision-making, let me give you two examples from Texas law that shows that's not true. First of all, in the early 1990s, the Democrats outlawed electroshock therapy on minors. Now, electroshock therapy has come back. These witch doctor psychologists are starting to do it again on minors in California. We won't be seeing that in Texas because the Democrats, when they control the legislature, entered into the patient-doctor relationship and said, no, this is a barbaric practice. And even though you may consent to do this with a psychologist, you can't do that in Texas because it's barbarism. And we're not going to let you do that to kids here. Texas also unanimously passed the female genital mutilation bill, in which they said that you cannot mutilate the genitals of girls. You cannot surgically mutilate them. You can't use anything that would cause harm to the genitals of little girls. And this was a result of certain religious practices and certain cultural practices that had made their way to the United States. So in my opinion, it's already illegal to do any of these procedures on girls in the state of Texas. And any doctor who has done so should suffer that 20-year prison penalty that Texas provides for violating the female genital mutilation laws. I just think we need to extend protections to boys too. And I think that if we're going to not allow the free exercise of religion to allow a parent to mutilate the genitals of a girl, we can't let identity medicine and identity politics be a reason to allow parents to mutilate their children's gender. So we need you to talk to Klick and tell her these things and tell her, we thought you were conservative and you would protect Texas children just like you protected them for female genital mutilation. Why aren't you protecting them from identity medicine and identity politics and transgender mutilation?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. And it's important to note that Representative Klick does represent a very conservative district in Texas. I think it would be appropriate to say that this is a district that would be interested in primarying her if in fact she would pass or not fight to the fullest extent possible against pediatric gender transitioning, as well as other social issues that are still not being addressed in Texas. But she comes from a very conservative district. Now, one of the things that I wanted to note is often when there are conservative politicians who are put in this situation, a lot of pressure is on them, and they often want to avoid the pressure by putting it off on other institutions. So they'll say, well, you should take that up with the Board of Education. You should take that up with family court. You should take that up with the medical boards. Can you speak a little bit to just those three right there? What's going on with the medical boards, with the school accreditation system, and with family court that we can say to somebody like Representative Klick, that's not enough? You know, the nursing associations, the American Medical Association, the physicians guilds, they're not going to really answer to this. What would you say to that?
So, one of the more disturbing events that's happened in the last 5 years is the rapid collapse of the ruling professional bodies in this country to identity politics, into something that I call identity medicine. Mm-hmm. And it's basically happened like this. It started with the American Psychological Association. They literally had a riot at their 2015 meeting. Like, it got out of control, it got violent, and committees were pressured to normalize transgenderism. Okay, so first of all, let's just be clear what we're talking about here. The standards for evidence in court, for example, are the Darby-Fry standards. And those standards require the use of a scientific method and discipline-specific standards for evidence, right? But what happens in the ruling bodies of these professional associations, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Psychological Association, the Endocrine Society, and so forth, the Texas Psychological Association, what happens in these institutions isn't science, okay? These are bureaucratic and democratic decisions. They have committees that vote on things, okay? It's not scientific. That's one of the things that these agencies have used to bamboozle people. And let me just give you an example from the Texas Psychological Association in response to my Save James case. In response to my court case, they put out a communication to every psychologist in Texas saying that if a child presents to you as a gender other than their biological sex, you must affirm it. You can't help them identify with their biological sex. You have to affirm them as the other sex or lose your license. And that's really remarkable. So it seems very clear that the professional bodies are willing to use non-scientific methods, bureaucratic and democratic interventions into the patient-doctor relationship. Mm-hmm. But they're telling us that we shouldn't pass laws to go in there and do the same thing that they're doing. Mm-hmm. You know, the American Academy of Pediatrics has said the same thing, that if a child goes into a pediatrician's office and presents differently than their biological sex, the pediatrician must affirm that child. Now, let's be clear, we're talking about affirming. We're talking about using female pronouns, using any preferred name, but more than that, we're talking about one of the most important authority figures in a child's life, literally teaching them that their delusion is true, mm-hmm. and causing those delusions to persist. So what we have here is the professional bodies in the United States are caving to identity politics, and they're using their bureaucratic processes to masquerade as science, to bully you into accepting this for your children, and to bully legislatures into accepting these barbaric practices of literally cutting the testicles and penis off little boys. That's what they're doing. Literally cutting the testicles and penis off little boys to make you think that that's normal. And that's actually good for those little boys.
And one of the things is, if people say, well, we trust the experts on this because they're the ones, this is their life profession, their peers can judge whether the research is solid or not. A lot of this you have to assess in light of what we know about the academy and how it works. The whole system of tenure and peer review was based on the idea that these people would be objective and that we could trust them to regulate mm-hmm. their own industry. You see something along the lines of what the American Medical Association and similar mm-hmm. journals like the New England Journal of Medicine mm-hmm. said last year. They came to the conclusion that the spread of COVID was not a health threat if you had large numbers of people congregating to protest against mm-hmm. white supremacy, but it was a health threat when you had even smaller numbers gathering to protest against the mask lockdowns.
That's right.
Or against other constitutional issues. That actually makes no sense. I think anybody who has basic grounding and logic can see that these associations are not trustworthy. Mm-hmm. They're making very unreliable assessments, and it's not just the science that is leading them. The peer review system has become a system of social pressure and peer pressure, not peer review. So, once that objectivity is lost, the whole system is falling apart. So if Representative Klick, coming at it as a nurse and healthcare professional, says, well, we need to leave this decision between families and their doctors, which is a classic conservative dodge on a lot of this, we have to reject that because we have to be realistic about the context that we're in. Every time they say, well, the American Medical Association or the American Psychiatric Association has made this pronouncement or that pronouncement, just remember that for 140 some odd years, the American Psychiatric Association classified homosexuality as a mental disorder. So if in fact you objected so much to that, why are you then turning to the exact same association, the exact same profession to now affirm this. If they could be wrong for 140 years, and I'm just going by what they say. And
Yeah.
if they could be wrong for 140 years, of course they can be wrong for 40
Yeah.
years, and they could be wrong for 15 years.
This is
obviously.
this is one of the fundamental things that I had to deal with at trial. So let me give you, I like to give, Bobby is great at explaining the problem. Let me give you some examples of it actually hurting a child. Okay. So in my court case in 2019, in December, a study was deployed against me at trial. And this was a gigantic study. It was extremely well conducted. It had a large sample size. So it's very unusual in psychology to have studies this big. It was statistically sound. Its methods were good. I'm an applied statistician. I make a living doing that. And I studied the methods. They were absolutely sound. And what the authors of the study claimed is that the evidence they gathered showed that children who underwent treatment by puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones had a marked decrease in suicidality, depression, and other markers of despair. They also showed that later down the line, when they had sex change surgeries, that these people had much lower suicide rates than people who had gender dysphoria who didn't get the surgery.
That's the research they presented.
That's what they presented
In his family court case.
That's correct.
And then what happened with those
So
studies?
since I happen to know something about statistics, I asked the study authors for the raw data. And I'm not making this up. I literally imported this into an open source system called R, and there's a command called describe. I just massaged the data into the R format, hit describe, and it gave me simple descriptive statistics. And it was completely obvious from one mathematical operation that everything that was stated about the study was false, that the authors of the study had lied in the Journal of the American Psychological Association. So I sent a letter to the APA about it. Well, a lot of other psychologists did too. Okay. So this was deployed against me at trial, and it hurt me really bad at trial. Okay. I probably didn't get full custody of my son to protect him because of that piece of evidence. It was a key piece of evidence. That study was retracted 8 months ago by the APA because not only did the conclusions not demonstrate what the authors claimed, not only did the authors of the study far overstate it, but it showed the exact opposite. That all of these drastic, I mean, we're talking about sterilizing kids, in their teenage years. We're talking about cutting the testicles off pubescent boys. Okay, we're talking about cutting the breasts off pubescent girls. These are drastic interventions. These interventions had zero effect on the suicidality, negative ideation, or anything. There were literally no differences in outcomes. And the mathematics of the study clearly show that. There was no way for the study authors not to know that that's what the study showed. They lied in their conclusion section in order to push an ideological agenda. But I'd also like to make a theoretical point here, Bobby. We've talked about this a lot. So you may not know this, but Bobby and I occasionally will share a glass of wine together, and we will go off on philosophical tangents for the night.
Yeah.
Until his wife shuts us down.
Right.
So one of the things we've often talked about is this peer review process. So one of the things I like to point out, and I pointed out to the jury in my trial, is that the peer review process is completely against all of the principles of science. Science came about specifically to remove authority as a measure of the reliability of conclusions. Okay, that's why we got science. People were in authority making false claims about the world. And scientists said, no, we should look at observations. We should not rely on authorities to tell us about the world. Peer review has just become the new Inquisition. It's simply a new authority that will say, you can't trust your lying eyes. The sky is actually red. They'll tell you things completely against your plain observable common sense, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is the left has become incredibly sophisticated in using peer review processes to socially construct scientific facts. And they don't get discovered for decades because it becomes very hard to disentangle them from the grant system and other financial incentives, right? So what I'm saying to you is, in science, we rely on data. We don't rely on credentials or expertise, okay? Anybody can challenge any fact presented by any expert, because we live in an age of science, and thank goodness we can.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we've been joined by Tracy Shannon,
Hi,
who's
Tracy.
here. I know that you guys in the audience, the dozens of people in the audience, I can't see her from where you're standing. If two of you want to come forward, you can be able to see Tracy. Tracy, we've talked a little bit about the status right now of the legislation. Jeff has given an overview of why it's so important, why this law matters. Now, you've been to Austin several times. Is that correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Is that, yeah. Are you here? Are you able to hear?
Yes.
Let me see if we can change the settings on here. I think the sound is not coming through. I'm just going to change the settings for a second to get the sound up. Basically, Tracy has been she has been to Austin several times, and she understands what's going on with the bills. Tracy, can you explain the difference between the bill that was brought up to the Senate and the one that was brought up to the House?
Yes, so the Senate bill, which is SB 1646, that would designate the transitioning of a minor under the age of 14 as child abuse. The House Bill 1399, would simply restrict certain procedures for the purpose of treating gender dysphoria in minors. And those treatments include the use of puberty blockers and wrong sex hormones.
All right. So basically, that's about medication, right? Okay. So there's a difference between social transitioning, which involves all of the pressure from counselors, from teachers, from people out there in the culture, and from peers and parents telling people that they need to start getting everyone to use different pronouns, getting into their mind and trying to convince them, pressure them. Oh, you throw a ball like a girl, which I do. I sometimes throw things. When I did grenades training in the Army, oh my gosh, I almost killed the whole unit because I could not throw that well. Okay, and people will put all this pressure on you to tell you that means that you're a girl, right? That's the social part of it. The bill that is in the Senate, which is not where Representative Klick serves, she is in the House of Representatives, but in the Senate, that bill that is being considered there, and which we'll have a hearing on this upcoming Monday, takes a very serious look at the social transitioning, but its cutoff date is the age of 14. Okay. So above the age of 14, those social pressures are not necessarily going to be prohibited by that bill. The bill that is before Representative Klick's committee, and which we'll have a hearing this upcoming Wednesday, that's Wednesday, April 15th, that bill is looking at the medical side of it only. So the puberty blockers, the medical treatments that are preparing you for the surgery to actually change your sex biologically. But that one has a higher cutoff date in terms of, for those purposes, it would be 18. Is that correct?
That's right. And technically,
okay.
It's kind of an error, I think, to say it's child abuse of a minor under the age of 14. I think that's a mistake in the language that will hopefully be corrected, because the definition of child abuse in the code, it applies to all minors. So this is kind of softening our stance on, when child abuse exists. So there is a problem with that bill with that age, but it'd be good to stop people transitioning their 2-year-olds to 14-year-olds socially, having them go to school presenting as the opposite sex, and enrolling in sports and dance, etc., as the opposite sex, and dressing full-time as opposite sex. And if someone thinks that's okay to do and that's the way to watch and wait, I just want to tell you or give you an example. And I don't mean to be obscene or gross, but it is shocking. But I'm going to tell you what these parents are doing to their small children. Here's an example of what they do to girls. There's a thing called Packers for girls who are confused, little girls that have been told by adults that they are boys. This is what they are putting in their underwear. Okay, these tiny things called Packers, looks like a little soft dildo for little girls. This one was ordered for a 3-year-old. Okay, so this we are talking about child abuse. I mean, I can't imagine.
That's social transitioning. So that's not being affected by the bill that Klick has given a hearing to, right? It is being affected in, right, okay.
That's being affected by Senate Bill 1646, which has a hearing Monday morning at 9 a.m. And Senate Bill 1646 is the companion bill to House Bill 68 by Steve Toth, which designates transition of a minor as child abuse. But I'm hearing that House Bill 68, which is in Representative Klick's committee, the House Committee on Public Health, she chairs that, but she doesn't want to give it a hearing because she said, according to the Texas scorecard, she has said that she's afraid it would traumatize the trans people if we had a hearing on House Bill 68. I'm sorry, but I'm a little traumatized by the idea of little girls going to school with this in their underwear, Representative Klick. So we need to stop the social transition of these children. Social transition actually leads to the medical pathway. So if you socially transition children, almost 100% of the time, they're going to get on the medical pathway, including puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. And that's irreversible. You cannot reverse all of that. They're lying to you when they say it's reversible. There's detransitioners now who are telling you it's not all irreversible. What it does to your brain, it's not reversible. What it does to your development, it's not reversible. If you grow a beard as a woman, that is not reversible. And hair removal is not always successful. And it's also very expensive. I mean, you have to be able to have, be a good candidate for facial hair removal. Not everybody can do that successfully. And as you know, as a male, you don't just, when you have all that testosterone in your body, you don't just grow a little facial hair. You also produce more hair all over your whole body. And your voice deepens when you're on testosterone. And so these women can never have their voices changed back. Even if they try, and even if they try to have vocal cord surgery, they're going to have a deepened voice.
Yeah, this is Jeff Morgan, who works a lot on family issues. I do, if you'd like to make a comment, and then I want to go over the specific bills and what, if you do want to step up and call Representative Klick's contact number, please do so. I'm going to go over exactly where her obligations lie with all of these bills, because even if the bill originates in the Senate, it is going to have to get bumped down to the House. So, and because Stephanie Klick is in the House and she has the Public Health Committee in the House, she will be having to decide whether or not to give some of those bills hearings as well. What were you going to say?
I just thought it was very interesting that you talked about how it would traumatize the transgender community. And I'm going to speak, as I was down at the trial in October, a year and a half ago, for the entire thing. And there was a trans person down there who was being interviewed. And what this person said was this: I knew from an early youth that I was a girl. This is what she said. But he said, "Dear God, do not do this to an 8-year-old child. This is abuse." And I think the idea that somehow the transgender community is going to be traumatized, I think that is insulting to the community. Mm-hmm. I think that is prejudicial. I think that is so demeaning to say that, are you telling me that these people don't know that abuse is taking place? I think that is one of the most insulting things that could be said about the community, because whatever their reason is for this idea for becoming transgender or whatever, it does not mean that they've lost all sense of morality and abuse. And I find that argument to be very unpersuasive. There's only a very few radicals that are trying to use that, like we're going to be traumatized. It's a false argument. We need to address that thing head on, my opinion.
Right. Yes. Okay. It's a very good point. And I do want to go over, because Representative Klick is really in the spotlight right now, because she is a longstanding member. She represents a conservative district. Mm-hmm. She's a nurse by profession. She is deeply Christian, mm-hmm. Judging from her education. Mm-hmm. She actually did spearhead the conscience protection bill mm-hmm. that is going through and which has a likelihood of passing. But I want to discuss why the conscience protection bill is not going to solve this problem. We'll talk about that in a moment. Mm-hmm. But let's talk about some of the bills that are in the hopper so you can understand what you can do if you call up Stephanie Klick. There is a House Bill 68, which is, Tracy, that's the one you just talked about, that was brought forward in the House, that's Stephanie Klick's chamber, and that would classify this as child abuse all the way up to the age of 18, okay? So that would, if that one were to get a hearing in the House of Representatives of the Texas legislature, that would be fantastic because that would go beyond what the Senate is considering. It would cover that period from the age of 14 to 18, which is that's high school, basically, right? It would make it so that this cannot be pushed on children in high school. That has not been given a hearing. I believe that was brought by Representative Toth, wasn't it? Has the bill been withdrawn, or is it's still there? So Stephanie Klick can still give a hearing to that bill. And please, Stephanie Klick, it is wonderful that you're giving a hearing to 1399, but House Bill 68 that's the gold standard. That's the one that we want, because that will basically say, you know, you cannot create a culture of harassment and peer pressure. You can't psychologically damage people and create a hostile learning environment in our high schools by pushing transgenderism on students. Given the fact that the research behind this is weak and nobody wants to look at the research, we do need the legislation to come forth from the Texas House. Okay, so HB 68, that's one that she could give a hearing to. HB 1399 is the one that she did give a hearing to, which is for Wednesday. Is that correct, Tracy?
That's correct. Wednesday morning at 8 a.m. in the House Committee on Public Health. If you cannot go in person, which is preferable, then you can go to the following online address.
Yeah, read me the website and I'll put it on the screen so people can see, okay?
It's https://comments.house.texas.gov/home.
Oh wait, so it's HTTPS?
Yeah, if you just put www. It doesn't go to that link, but I can put the whole address in the comments if you want to.
Yeah, if you could do that, although it looks like somebody has gotten in and has disabled our chat function, because I just was trying to take care of that. It looks like they've shut that down. I don't know, but try to put it in the comment section and see if it goes up there, okay? So because of the fact that that hearing is coming up on Wednesday for HB 1399, if you want to submit testimony and speak to that, you can. Now, remember, HB 1399, remember, is only banning medical interventions like the puberty blockers, drugs, and surgery. It's not speaking to the counseling and the peer pressure and the unhealthy learning environment for kids when this is being brought up in high schools. Okay, but Stephanie Klick did give a hearing to that, which is good. We're very glad about that. The one thing that you have to keep in mind, when we look at those ones, okay, is that Stephanie Klick still needs to call for a vote for that to be voted on. All right. Hold on one second. Let me just put link to submit testimony, right? Okay. For HB 1399, at the meeting of the public health committee, if she does not call for a vote in committee on Wednesday, there's probably not going to be enough time for that bill to become law, because it has to be voted in committee and then it has to be referred to the floor of the Texas House of Representatives. The Speaker of the House is Dade Phelan, and that is not someone who was going to bring up that bill directly on the floor. It has to be brought from the committee. Is that correct, Jeff? Okay, so basically, she has got to call for a vote in committee on Wednesday. So if you speak to Representative Klick's number, and I'm going to put that number back up there again, urge her, please pressure her if you need to call for a vote on what happened? Okay, to call for a vote, please, to call for a vote on that bill. Okay, now, HB 1458, protecting female sports from transgender, the transgender men in sports, that's going through. So is the Senate version of that. The Senate version of the bill that would ban social transitioning for people. That's in the Senate State Affairs Committee, which is headed by Brian Hughes. Okay, and Brian Hughes, we met with his office. They were very supportive of these efforts. They were but that one also, that one is, if it passes in the Senate, it will probably be referred to the House. And so then it's back on Stephanie Klick's agenda again. And so if you call her, even if you're just discussing the Senate bill, please pressure her to call for that bill to be brought for discussion in the House.
I believe that 6 people or 7 in that committee have also either sponsored or co-sponsored that bill. I'm not positive, but so there's a lot of support for that bill. That bill
the one in the Senate.
The one in the Senate.
The one in the Senate. But she could also intervene, because when that goes to the House, she could open it up for amendments, right? So that it gets the age is lifted to 18.
Yeah, that's a question that I'm not familiar enough with. But I do know too that the other issue with, and this is something important that you were talking about, because there is a whole LGBTQ caucus down there, and Joseph Moody, I believe, is a member of that, and he's also the head of calendars. So between the Speaker of the House and Joseph Moody, there are lots of opportunities for them to derail this.
Right.
So this is something that we have to, as you mentioned, call for the vote.
Yeah, the call for the vote. So, and the thing is that for Representative Klick, being from a district that is so conservative, we've got to make it clear that she can't just be halfway in this. She has got to push for it. We need a champion, because, even if it gets to the floor vote in the House, someone's got to be pushing for it to get through the Senate. And then if it passes both houses, which it has to do, then we've got to have a pressure campaign to make Governor Abbott sign it. And there's a lot of ways. Now, the calendar committee, that is not under her control.
No,
right?
It's not.
But ultimately, if she gets it through her committee, then she's got to use the bully pulpit to push the calendar committee to put it on the calendar, right?
So the head of the calendar committee has a lot of influence, and he has a lot of, well, he can derail things at will. And this has happened in the past.
Mm-hmm.
One of the tricks that they do, when you've talked a little bit about tricks, is that, they delay a bill for the hearing. And then, then there's a certain amount of time that needs to go by, and then it goes to the calendar, and the calendar somehow conveniently forgets it, and the session runs out.
Right.
So you have popular bills that don't get voted on because there is a reason that they don't want them to pass.
They don't want them to pass. Okay. All right. So these are all things. Now, taking a broader view, if you could hand me this other sheet, I want to discuss why we're in this situation. Okay. And what we need going forward. Both Tracy and I are in support if we can try to get people to pressure Governor Abbott to call a special session, okay? These bills, if they pass, it would be wonderful if we get these to pass, but you're looking at an island in an ocean of social problems. You're just hitting one part of it. And there are 16 priorities that Tracy and I went and we spoke to people in Austin about. People are positive to the ideas, but there's so many obstacles and hurdles to getting anything pushed. Just to give you a sense of why we need the legislators to start moving the ball on things. Number one is, I'll go over Tracy's ideas first. She brought up the idea of for instance, getting pride celebrations removed from schools, gay pride. We don't understand why our public schools are using public funds to promote homosexuality and transgenderism in the schools. This is not necessary. It creates a great deal of speculation and titillating conversation among peers. So that leads to that opens the door to sexual harassment. It opens the door to sexual assault. And then you're multiplying all of the problems. But we can't seem to get anyone to push that. Tracy also brought out the issue of trying to get obscenity removed from schools and libraries and stopping things like Drag Queen Story Hour. Mm-hmm. And that also has hit roadblocks. Although, Tracy, there is one bill that has been brought forward about the obscenity exemption. Could you speak to that really quickly?
Yeah, let me see if I can find it on my list.
So this is basically, there is a law in the Texas Education Code that allows people to present and even to force obscene pornographic materials to minors if it's being used for an educational purpose. Okay.
Educational broadly defined.
Right. So there's a lot of cracks and leaks in this vessel, and that's why we're sitting here plugging hole after hole after hole. We need people like Stephanie Klick to take the initiative. So we need signs that if you're going to come, if you're not going to call for a special session and you're not going to introduce any of these new bills in the session that we have, you're not going to ask for an extension on the deadline to file new bills, then I don't know. We need to see some sign that these politicians have any intention of introducing legislation like this in 2022. I think that the prospects are very dim for it. So then we need to talk about who do we need to get out of office.
So Governor Abbott, when this whole Save James trial took place, he made a tweet about it. It may have been one of his most popular tweets talking about the abuse issue there.
Right.
I think he had 100,000 people that either liked it or shared it.
Right.
So, it's not like everybody is against this bill. There's a lot of support for it. And for our legislators and for our governor or anybody to be opposed to this, they're actually opposing the will of the majority of the people whom they're there to serve.
Right. But we've seen with Asa Hutchinson and Kristi Noem in Arkansas and South Dakota that the popular will isn't what is in the mix here.
Right.
They need to placate the popular conservative will while they are still trying to get the funding for their campaigns and the media access. And the people who are the gatekeepers there are liberals who are trying to push this on us, even if they're Republican. That doesn't even make a difference. Did you find the bill about the obscenity?
Yeah, and so the reason it was taking me a minute is because there's not just one bill. There's 4 bills that would address this, and there's 2 in the House and 2 in the Senate. House Bill 1811 would address obscene materials. It would remove the obscenity exception. House Bill 2360. That would also make it a criminal offense to distribute lewd visual material depicting a child. And then, let's see, there's Senate Bill 977 and Senate Bill 978. And those would be addressing the obscenity exception as well, and not allowing or make it with criminal penalties for distributing. And if anyone took 5 minutes to look in their research their own school district, they would find plenty of obscene material being distributed to the students. I just looked for about an hour a little over a week ago and found like 40 pages of documentation that I've now sent to my local paper. I've sent it to people running for school board. I'm now filing FOIA requests there. And one of the things that's a problem, and there's a bill that addresses it, and I don't remember which one it was and don't seem to have it written down, but one of the bills would address the database issue. It addressed the funding. So some of these databases like EBSCO that are used in the public schools haven't cleaned up their database. And once the child is logged into the database, it's a portal. So they're able to access whatever comes up in there through the back side, such as ads for sex work and pornographic stuff that's been coming up. And
this is how the transgenderism got into the schools. This is how, I'll spend a couple seconds on the broader view. Transgenderism had its biggest champion in pornography. There was an obsession going back 30 years, even longer, with male to female transsexuals. It was a fetish, and it was all in pornography. And so all of the people who were watching pornography, this became normalized. And I hate to get graphic, but it's the same thing with anal sex. In the debate about gay marriage, we were talking about the health risks for homosexual intercourse, and you would have all these people in the public square saying, but heterosexuals love anal sex just as much as homosexuals do. That comes from pornography. That is an illusion. That's a misconception, a misperception. You almost guarantee if someone's watching a lot of porn if they think that heterosexual women like anal sex as much as homosexual men do, right? And the same thing happened with transgenderism. It became normalized that way. And if this is being brought into the schools through the EBSCO portals and through what's research or whatever, the kids are on the computers being told to do searches, and they're coming up with this. It normalizes it. Okay. And so we want to try to stop these things from getting marketed directly to our children. Now, what a lot of people will say when you bring up these obscenity laws, Tracy, is they're going to say, well, this is an issue for the Board of Education. And I want to say, because I don't know if you have been involved in this, I think you have, but I've been with Mass Resistance. We go to Board of Ed all the time. In Austin alone, we spent how much time in 2017 and 2018 fighting over those Board of Ed laws? It has to come from the Texas state legislature. I don't want to hear the small government conservative excuse that that's a question for the local school boards. The local school boards are not doing it. The curriculum is coming from national organizations. They're coming from national professional associations like the NEA and the teachers associations. Okay, it's a national issue. So we need as high up as possible guidance or policy mandates to come to say that this must stop. Don't ask us as parents to have to constantly go to the Board of Education or to write letters to the principal that we know are not going to go anywhere. I've seen some of these library board meetings and school board meetings, and the people sitting on the board just sit there with their arms crossed. They don't listen to the parents because no one knows how to hold them accountable, and no one pays attention to school board elections. And that's one of the targets where the left spends a lot of money to get people stacked onto the school boards. So it has to come from the state legislature. Would you agree with that, Tracy?
Yeah, the state legislature could put the teeth in the law to enforce this. If there was this type of enforcement in our laws, then the school boards would do a better job. I mean, obviously at the local level, we have to have our eyes on it as parents. What I've suggested, even if the laws are in place, which would give it teeth, we still have to have our eyes on it and call it out and hold people accountable who allowed it into the system, such as in our libraries and our reading assignments for the children. We have to get better eyes on this. And I suggested, I really hate to say this, form a committee, but it is necessary to have a task force that is screening for obscenity in the various areas in the ways they're getting in the schools. And one way to get rid of a lot of it is to no longer allow these nonprofits and non-government organizations to be putting their curriculum in our schools. Because I found in my school that the Anti-Defamation League was their curriculum was being used, and their activities for No Place for Hate are being used in our schools all the way down to the kindergarten level. And it sounds great on the surface because we don't want any hatefulness in our schools and we hate bullying. But what Anti-Defamation League is actually a anti-Christian bigoted organization that's, very hostile to traditional values. Right. And when I looked at what their lesson plans they offer on their website, like 7 out of 9 of them included LGBTQ indoctrination. So when they're saying diversity and inclusion, and you're seeing all the boards that the kids created and they signed this pledge, the No Place for Hate pledge, for diversity and inclusion, really what they're signing up for, and the children don't know it, but they're celebrating it every year. They're hooking in these kids' commitment, and they don't even realize yet that they're agreeing to oppose the values that their parents have at home. They're agreeing to endorse and support and promote LGBTQ behaviors, because that's really what's going on. And in our schools, the little storybooks, for children, that you have 2 penguins that they say are homosexual because they're taking an egg together. This is really science. This is really 2 penguins helping their species to survive, but some pervert is telling the kids that this is a homosexual family, right? The way that they're manipulating the children into wholesale agreement with LGBTQ behaviors, it's extremely dishonest and unethical. It has no place in the schools, and it's an insult to the parents. Who decided that we needed these organizations to come in? Who declared our schools hateful and prejudiced? And who decided our kids were prejudiced and bigoted and needed to have this re-education training. We need
Right.
parents to address these things according to their worldview in their homes.
Yeah, and often what I hear from conservatives is they say, well, they already passed a law that was banning sex ed to the lower grades. Okay, now there are huge loopholes in that law, but I want you to pay very careful attention to this. They are getting the same vulgar and socially high pressure curriculum into kids' classrooms through other things because they don't classify it as sex ed. It's happening in the English class, in writing class, in art class. It's happening in these civics training programs, in suicide prevention programs, in, be a good citizen, be a nice person programs. They do all that, and they introduce very controversial and disputed claims, and it's supposedly to make sure that kids are going to be nice to each other. Anti-bullying, that's the classic example. Right. So a lot of this material is in there. Now, there are a whole host of things that at Mass Resistance we have been trying to see whether anybody would pick up in Texas. And without these measures, we don't have a lot of the safeguards that people assume are there. So for instance, people think that because we have anti-harassment policies at schools and workplaces, that's going to protect us from an unhealthy or hostile workplace or learning environment. But that's not true, because they are not enforcing harassment law when it comes to people who feel like there's this sexually discomforting and weird content being forced on them through their school programs or through workplace, training sessions. And so we would like to see that anti-discrimination law extended to cover this, so that kids can't be forced to be talking about dildos being placed in people's underwear when they're there to learn reading, writing, and arithmetic. But the point is, we can't get traction on those bills. So we're stuck with, we have to get these Save James bills passed, because the kids are going to be under a lot of peer pressure. Their classmates are going to be given the idea that it's okay for them to pressure their kids, their colleagues and their classmates about their sexual orientation, about their sexual habits, and about their gender identity. All of that's going to be happening. So we need this, at least the ball to start with these. One of the other things is we hear a lot about sexual assault, and that all comes up a lot when we talk about abortion bills and whenever we talk about women's rights protections. But a lot of times what I have seen is that in sexual assault of minors, if it's same sex, or if the perpetrator is a transgender person, right, it's not even classified as sexual assault. Mm-hmm. People think that it's just the victim coming out of the closet as gay, or or if they reject the advances of the person who impose themselves on them, then they're transphobic or homophobic. So a lot of this law is just, there's all these places that it has to be cleaned up, and we're working on that. But for right now, all of that's not going to get cleaned up for years. So we need the Save James bills to go forward. All right, so this is the thing. Stephanie Klick, she has a lot of power in her hands as the head of the Public Health Committee. She needs these bills. She needs to be supportive of the bills that are coming from the Senate. She needs to be supportive of the bills that are coming from the House. She needs to see it through. She needs to call for a vote on the floor so that we have enough time. And if the time runs out, then we need to call her and make sure that she is going to support either an extended session, extend the deadline for filing new legislation, or for a special session.
So you've talked about the public health issue. Yeah. And I remember back about 40 years ago, James Dobson and others, they published the Attorney General's report on pornography. Right. I thought it was decided at that time that pornography was a public health issue. Mm-hmm. And things have gotten a lot worse since then. So this is a debate we should not even be having to have right now. We know that already, and it's gotten worse. Mm-hmm. And so these bills that you're talking about, and I mean, the committee that the bills are in front of, Representative Klick, as a nurse, should know this stuff. Mm-hmm. I've met with Representative Klick in the past, and she was supportive for something that I was going for her, that I proposed to her. at the time. So, I mean, I'm hoping that she's going to do all of these different things.
Well, that's the thing is but she needs to hear from people.
She does need to hear
She needs to hear from people because she is hearing from the other side. Everyone in Austin is going to be hearing, and let's talk about that for a couple seconds, and then we'll let everyone go out and enjoy the beautiful Saturday afternoon. But, you're going to hear stories about how kids will kill themselves if they don't have access to puberty blockers. You're going to hear stories about how they were bullied, and it's all one-sided. It's very emotional, and these narratives are used to try to convince you that this is actually a good thing for public health, to allow people to make these gender transitions. And what I would say, number one, on suicide, people commit suicide as the culmination of a number of mental health issues, a lot of stresses. So, if somebody kills themselves, you can't use that as an excuse to say, oh, well, we need to allow all of these procedures because we don't have evidence that shows that does reduce the suicide rate.
In fact, the evidence is just the other way around, because there was a Swedish study that said that people who go through the process of transgender in Sweden, where there's much more accepting, had a 19 times higher suicide rate. Right. And if you go back to Phil McHugh, the American psychiatrist of the
Paul McHugh,
is it Paul? I'm sorry.
He was from Johns Hopkins. Right.
But and he said that this is a psychological issue, the transgender stuff, and I don't understand why we aren't treating this as something to deal with. You talked about mental disorders. He called it that, and it's biologically impossible to do so. This is a discussion we shouldn't even be having to have. But you're right. We do have to have this in here because for some reason right now, it's like everybody is confused about this thing. And we need the clarity.
I mean, we have fought, to try to get cancel culture bills considered by the Texas legislature, to get bills to force schools to change their accreditation guidelines, or at least for Texas to get control of the accreditation guidelines, to try to crack down on the fake research. But those things are not going to get taken care of right now. So there is no one who is presenting a safeguard. This would be the first safeguard that's there. And so Stephanie Klick needs to answer it. The other thing you're going to hear a lot about is bullying. And I just want to make really clear that in the Paul McHugh study and in other studies, for instance, that came out of the National Institute for Health and the National Institute for Justice, they found that there was a tremendous amount of bullying within the LGBT community. And that's one of the reasons why Tracy, for instance, she put forward the idea of we should have legislation to protect the trans widows, the widows who have been abused by the men or women who transition to the other gender and then have all of these harms that are inflicted on their spouses that no one is caring about.
Their children.
Right. So when you hear about anti-bullying and prejudice or anti-phobias of all kinds, all of those things, remember that a lot of those harms are also they're even more prevalent within the community, right? That you're telling people to enter with open arms. Would you agree with that, Tracy?
Absolutely. There's a ton of abuse. I mean, they have the highest rates of domestic violence among any group, and the highest rates of actually killing their partners of any group, and highest rates of alcohol and drug abuse of any group. So yeah, there's bullying and there's really, when I was doing the drag queen research, that's when I really got my first, close look of the culture, instead of what's advertised on TV and in these, Hallmark like commercials, and just how cruel and mean they are even to each other, and the expectations to have the perfect body and perfect looks and your hair perfect and everything. There's such a major focus on looks too, and this is the community that's trying to lecture us on bullying.
Right. Well, Ellie Dick, she had posted something in the comment section that Texas has girls from Eastern Europe coming on student visas and working as call girl cam girls, which is in violation of the moral turpitude part of the visa agreement. There are so many. Thank you, Ellie. That's something that we need to consider when we look at we had one bill that we were trying to push by mass resistance that dealt with immigration and a lot of these moral questions with the sex traffic and immigration. I think that's important, but that also has stalled. So, we're at a situation where there are so many things that fall under the realm of public health that we do need, these legislators to take action on. We will probably hear from businesses saying that businesses are going to, that what's the usual, Jeff, if you want to join us for a second and explain to us what the, because he knows a lot about this.
Yeah,
they always bring the argument that corporations are not going to want to locate in Texas if these laws are passed, and therefore we're going to lose jobs. How do we relate to that when Stephanie Klick hears this claim?
It's one of the more amusing objections, right? Do we really think that corporations are going to get up and move out of here? Because it would cost enormous amounts of money to do that. It's just not the case. Do we see sporting events moving out of Georgia after they do their voting law changes? Do we see them moving out? Sure. But do we see the sports teams moving out? We don't see that, right? The companies aren't going to do that. Why are companies, though? It's a good question. Why are corporations so supportive of the transgender agenda and the gender identity agenda? And the reason is very simple. Corporations today are multinational. Corporations, big corporations that operate in your state. I'll give you an example. Why did Asa Hutchinson veto the bill outlawing transgender mutilation of kids? He did it because Walmart didn't want him to. That's why. Walmart's based in Arkansas. So Walmart is a giant multinational corporation, and it is not run for the benefit of the United States economy. It's run for the benefit of itself, and it's multinational. It doesn't have any national loyalties to in any country in which it operates. In fact, if Walmart has any loyalties, it's to its giant supplier base in China, not to the United States, okay? Even though its headquarters is here. So what you have is giant corporations cooperating with enemies of the United States, like China, who are promoting social ideologies to create social disintegration and demoralization in the United States. And they're essentially selling your kids out for money. That's what they're actually doing. But I'll tell you this, though. There's no reason to have Chinese suppliers if there are no U.S. buyers. You want suppliers, you got to have your buyers. I'm imitating Johnny Cochran here, right? So you ultimately have to decide whether you want a government that holds corporations accountable for running their operations for the benefit of the people of Texas, or for enemies of the United States. So whenever you hear somebody say the corporations will leave, the corporations won't like it, what you should hear and should translate in your own mind is, what will enemies of the United States think about this? What will other countries that this corporation makes money from think about this? And it shows every time you hear it, you should think, my government doesn't care about me. It doesn't care about citizens, and it doesn't care about our kids. That's what that really means.
I thought it was interesting you're talking about China right now, because with some of these things that we're talking about, the undermining of the morals of our children, and what Ellie said there about talking about the moral turpitude part of the visa agreement there. But it used to be that people would know that communist countries wanted, in order to take over and to make inroads in America, one of the goals had to be to demoralize the youth and to undermine the morality of the nation, and also to break down the family. Mm-hmm. And what you're finding in some of these things right now, I mean, all of these three things are working together. Do you have any comment about that?
Yeah, there are well-known models for the destabilization of countries. Our own CIA is an expert at it. The Russian KGB are expert at it. Both of the models, the primary models you see, the American model for destabilization and the Russian model for destabilization, contain a phase that they both call demoralization. Now, you might be thinking that means making people feel despair, dejected, or depressed, because that's what we normally think of demoralized. That isn't what they mean. They mean it literally, demoralize. They mean the removal of morals from the society. That's why when in the modern day, when you conquer a country, the very first thing they do is flood it with pornography. It's the very first thing. Pornography, sexual liberation, and the elimination of strict morals is a form of social control, which prevents you from mobilizing against a tyrannical government. So that's another thing. You're going to hear like all kinds of libertarian arguments about free sexuality, for we can't get inside the parent-child relationship. Those are all propagandistic forms to demoralize your society, remove parental authority, and create conditions for an alternative form of social control than the U.S. family.
Right. I think that if we had good leadership, they would not be intimidated by these threats from the corporations. And that, I would tell those corporations, they need to choose between the United States and, the other countries, or, like China and the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one of the things that, as a movement, we have to start doing is we have to adopt a realist mindset, right, Tracy? Mm-hmm. If we had good leaders, yes. The fact is we don't have good leaders. So the question is no longer how do we persuade our leaders to represent us. We have to really ask ourselves, what are the means of coercing our rulers to represent us? What are the means of coercion, not the means of persuasion? And we need to be asking those same questions about big tech, which censors our points of view because they're pro-trans and they want to really, and this is what, I'll tell you another thing. It's not anti-trans to try to stop the genital mutilation of kids. We should be able to talk about that freely anywhere and any place, right? But we can't. We have to be careful. So we need to have this attitude. What are the means of coercion? And we need to ask ourselves, we're saddled with bad leaders. I mean, you may think the Democratic leaders are bad, but they get results for their voting base. And they get them every single session, okay? Our guys don't. So we have to ask different questions, I think, in order to get changes there. But we can do the same thing with these corporations.
Right. Okay, I want to thank everyone for who logged in and watched. And just as to cap everything off, Vinny, you wanted to say hello to Tracy?
Hi, Tracy. Vineet Mansukani.
Hi.
On Facebook.
Yes. Yes. So good to see you.
One of the most reliable sources of the historical reminders about the consequences of letting the family fall apart.
He's also done, I must say, I have to plug him a little bit. He's done a lot of good thinking into the effects of toxic stress that's induced by these things. And he has a lot of good insight into that. We should talk to him sometime.
Right.
Yes. In fact, Jeff has been talking to me, and more lately, I feel this is the time is finally right to put that out there and play that card.
Yes.
I think we need to do that.
I'd love to have a broadcast with Vinny. Yeah, that sounds good. Let's just as a reminder. Okay, so we have Representative Klick'S Austin contact information up here on the screen. When you're calling her, try to be very specific. We're talking about, we want HB 68 to be given a hearing, okay? HB 1399 has been given a hearing by Representative Klick. We need her to push for a vote in committee so that it can go to the floor for a vote. And we need her to be aggressive about getting that a fair hearing in the Senate so it can go to Governor Abbott's desk. And we need her to really push for Governor Abbott to sign it. We want her to do everything she can in cooperation with the Senate for the Senate bills that are of the same Save James version that are coming from the Senate side, and we'll have to get, if they get out of committee and if they make it past the floor vote in the Senate, they're going to have to come to the House for to be passed there too, okay? And the last thing is, if you can please urge Representative Klick to support an extension of this session so more bills can be introduced and or a special session to be called. Does that about cover it?
About covers it. If we have a volunteers at a Facebook page. You just go into Facebook, search for Save James, and they do updates from everywhere about the legislation and about pending litigation.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Hey, Tracy, this app says "Make Women Great Again," and this is from Anthony Paul Johnson. It's okay. He's part of the Network 21 group out of Orlando. So he was on Good Morning Britain promoting his seminar, Make Women Great Again, that they had a few months ago. And my variation is Make Women and Family Great Again. Anyway, I have the female version of this cap with one of the panels is pink. And you are one of the candidates that I'm thinking of awarding the cap to.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we do need to make women
Can we
great.
get a picture of it with Jeff here and send it to Anthony Paul Johnson as a thank you?
We're just one segment of society that needs to get its priorities back in order, you know.
That's right. That's
All
right.
right.
Yeah, I agree.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye, and thanks to everyone who tuned in. Bye.
Bye.